I used to believe that survival meant holding on. Let me tell you how a sunken cathedral, a woman who spoke to whales in a language of clicks and silence, and my own desperate grip on everything I thought I needed taught me that the ocean doesn't reward struggle, it rewards surrender. That the creatures who thrive in the deep aren't the ones who fight the pressure, they're the ones who let it hold them. My name is Marisol. I'm 39 years old. I spent 15 years as a commercial diver, salvaging wrecks, repairing pipelines, performing the underwater labor that land-based economies depend on but never witness. I was excellent at my job. I was terrified of the water. The old me was control-made flesh. I planned every dive with obsessive precision, equipment checks, contingency protocols, depth time calculations that accounted for every variable except the one that mattered, my own refusal to trust anything I couldn't command. I grew up in a house where love was conditional on performance. My mother, a surgeon, measured affection in achievement. My father, absent except for his expectations, sent letters that graded my progress rather than expressing interest. I learned early that survival meant never dropping anything, never needing help, never showing the weakness of dependency. The ocean should have cured me of this. It should have taught me that humans are guests in a realm that doesn't acknowledge our control. But I approached diving as conquest. I descended with aggression, fought the water as if it were resisting me, ascended with relief that I had once again defeated an enemy that wasn't fighting back. I told myself this was professionalism, safety consciousness, the responsible approach to an environment that could kill without malice. What I was doing was translating my childhood into depth and pressure. I was performing independence in a medium that required interdependence. I was drowning slowly, invisibly, in the belief that I could earn my way to survival. The breaking point was the cathedral. It wasn't a real cathedral, of course. It was a natural formation off the coast of Malta, an underwater cave system where volcanic activity had created spires and arches that looked like Gothic architecture, like something built by hands that understood worship, then abandoned to the sea. I was diving alone, against protocol, against wisdom, against the specific loneliness that had driven me to seek solitude in the one place where solitude was most dangerous. I descended to 80 meters. The light was different there, not absent, but transformed, filtered through water and depth into something that felt ancient, religious, the color of old stained glass. The cathedral spread below me, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Awe, the surrender of self to something larger. Then my regulator failed. Not dramatically, just slowly, the flow diminishing, the resistance increasing, my body noticing before my mind could process. I reached for my backup. It tangled in the lines I'd arranged with my usual obsessive precision, lines that had become a web I couldn't navigate. I was going to die. The thought arrived calmly, almost academically. I had 80 meters of water above me, failing equipment, and the specific solitude I had chosen because I couldn't bear to need anyone. I fought. Of course I fought. I thrashed against the lines, clawed toward the surface, burned through my remaining air in the panic that I had always believed would kill me if I ever allowed it. I had been wrong about many things. I was not wrong about this. The ocean pressed back. Not cruelly, indifferently. The pressure at 80 meters doesn't care about your fear, it simply is. And in my struggling, I was consuming exactly what I needed to preserve. The last of my breath, the last of my composure, the last of my delusion that I could command my way through anything. I blacked out. I woke in a chamber, not a hospital, not a decompression tank, a space that felt like being inside a whale, warm, dark, surrounded by sound that wasn't quite music but wasn't quite noise. She was there, the woman I would come to know as Kira. She was 60, maybe older, her skin the specific leather of someone who had spent decades in salt and sun. Her eyes were wrong, pale, almost colorless, adapted to lightless places. She didn't speak, she clicked. The clicks were language. I understood this before I understood the words. She was speaking to me in the echolocation patterns of whales, in the language she had learned from decades of diving without equipment, of descending until her body adapted, until she could hold her breath for minutes, then tens of minutes, then the impossible spans that had transformed her into something between human and oceanic.
"You fought the water," she said, the clicks somehow translating in my mind, or perhaps my mind translating itself, desperate for meaning in survival. The water was not fighting you, it was holding you. You struggled until you had nothing left, and then you floated. The current brought you here. You were saved by your own defeat. I wanted to argue, to explain my professionalism, my preparation, my right to survive through effort. But I was alive because I had failed, because I had exhausted myself and surrendered and been carried to a place I could not have found through struggle. Kira taught me to dive differently, not as conquest, as conversation. She had no equipment, no tanks, no lines, no instruments of control. She descended on breath, on patience, on the specific trust that the ocean would provide what she needed if she stopped demanding it on her terms. We dove together. She showed me how to equalize not through force, but through relaxation, how to let the pressure enter and become part of you rather than something to resist. She showed me how to hold my breath not through tension, but through calm, how to let the oxygen distribute itself rather than forcing it where I thought it should go. Most importantly, she showed me to listen. The listening was the hardest part. I had spent my life speaking, performing, proving. I had never learned to receive, to be present without agenda, to let the world communicate on its own terms. Kira took me to the cathedral again, not to the spires, but to the floor, to the sediment where creatures lived that I had never noticed, bioluminescent organisms, translucent fish, the specific life that thrives in places where light never reaches. These creatures don't fight the darkness, Kira clicked. They become the darkness. They produce their own light. They don't need what you need. They need what they have. She introduced me to the whales. Not individually, whales don't experience individuality the way humans do. They experience connection, resonance, the specific communication of presence across distances that would break human relationships. I learned to click, badly at first, then better. I learned that whale song isn't performance, it's reporting, sharing location, sharing condition, sharing the specific truth of where you are and what you need, without shame, without manipulation, without the human terror that need itself is weakness. I learned that the whale who sings alone is not lonely. The whale who sings alone is broadcasting, inviting response, trusting that someone will hear and come. The loneliness is in the silence that follows, in the absence of answer, not in the song itself. I began to change, not dramatically. I still worked, still dived commercially, still performed the labor that my life required, but I dove differently. I descended with patience rather than aggression. I worked with the water rather than against it. I began to notice what I had previously ignored, the particular quality of silence at depth, the way sound travels differently, the community of creatures that existed without my command and didn't require my approval. I began to need people. This was the hardest transformation. I, who had dived alone, worked alone, survived alone, I started to seek company, to ask for help, to admit that I couldn't carry everything, that my grip was exhausting me, that the ocean had been trying to teach me something I had been too afraid to learn. Kira died. Not dramatically, she simply didn't return from a dive. Her body was never found, which was appropriate. She had become oceanic enough that the distinction between her and the water had blurred. I mourned her in clicks, in the whale song she had taught me, broadcasting my grief into the darkness and trusting that something would hear. Something did. A pod appeared, humpbacks, passing through on migration. They sang with me, not in harmony, but in response, acknowledging my grief without fixing it, witnessing my loss without demanding that I recover. I understood then what Kira had been trying to teach me, that survival isn't holding on, it's letting go. It's trusting the current, trusting the pressure, trusting that you will be carried to where you need to be if you stop fighting the carrying. I still dive. I teach now, as Kira taught me, not the commercial techniques I learned in certification courses, but the older knowledge, the breathing, the patience, the listening, the specific surrender that the ocean requires and the land-based world has forgotten. I have a partner now, another diver, another student of Kira's, someone who also learned to stop fighting the water and start conversing with it. We dive together, we surface together, we need each other, which is the lesson I was most afraid to learn. The ocean is not my enemy. It was never my enemy. It was my teacher, my witness, my family of pressure and presence, and the specific light that only exists in the deepest places. I'm Marisol. I was a diver who fought the water. I became a diver who let it hold me.
I am finally learning to breathe.